about the program, Shobana. People will continue to join along the course of time, the whole period, and then people will drop out, come back. All this will happen. So that's something that you need to be aware of. Some speakers get distracted with that, but that's the nature of the game. So that's one thing I want to tell you. Second thing is this program is recorded. The purpose of the recording is to enable others who are not able to attend the session today to be able to listen into the conversation at that point. So that's the two important things I want to tell you first. The way the program works now is the first couple of minutes, I will just run through a very brief 3-slide presentation that talks about introducing you as well as letting people who are new to the program tell them how this program is run. And then after that, we'll go dive into the program. And I will give you the first 15 to 20 minutes for you to do a sort of a monologue. And what I request you to do in that first 20 minutes is to talk about your journey from the time you left CEG to where you are now, and focus mainly on any significant learnings, any significant observations or things that you think would be useful for people who are either in college now or just recently graduated to know. Because this is exactly the purpose of the program, is knowledge sharing, experience sharing, and information sharing. So you can talk about your story from the time you left CEG to where you are right now. You can talk about your educational experiences. You can talk about your work experiences. You can talk about any entrepreneurship experience, or you can talk about any life experience in general as well. One of the speakers who came in, Anu Schultz. I don't know if you know Anu. Anu Schultz's story was about just how she overcame challenges in life. It was extremely inspiring conversation. She
I know
spent more
her very well, by the way. I know because she and I were on a panel of Tamilians here. Like,
time. Okay.
during the Tamil Puthandu, a year or so ago, we both were on a panel together. So I know her pretty well. We've connected
Uh,
after that. Yeah.
so she spoke about her life challenges, how she overcame them to become a CEO of a company in the US. So you can talk about that too. So educational experiences or any corporate experience or entrepreneurship or life experiences. After 20 minutes, what I'll do is that we will do some fireside chat where I have a few questions I want to prompt so that you can answer them, which are very general. All my questions will be very open-ended and general. Because I want to prime the audience to think about what questions they want to ask and the topics that we can ask, etc. And then after the 10-15 minutes of fireside, we'll open up for the audience to ask the questions. There is a open source online software that I use called Slido, which I'll talk about in a second, where people can ask questions in that, which both you and me, both of us can see the questions. People can put the questions whenever they want, and the questions will show up in that screen. Slido also allows me as an administrator to do real-time polls. So I can ask questions to the audience in terms of what do they think about the program, what do they want to focus more on, less on, kind of a real-time feedback on what's going on. So those are things that I will be doing in the side while we're having the conversation, and Partha will be taking care of all the recording and any technical stuff and all that. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. So let's see. I'm just going to open up my presentation in a second. Just give me a second. You can see my screen right now, right? Can you see my screen?
I can.
Okay. So, welcome to the call, Shobana and the rest of the team. It is early morning in California for Shobana. So, thanks, Shobana, for joining the call a very early morning on a Sunday. I know weekends are very precious in the United States. Thank you for joining at such an early hour. I'm actually today doing this session from Austin, Texas. And I think many of our other participants are from all over the place. So I have a question in Slido, which I'll come to in a second, where people can say where they're joining from. So we get an idea where the audience are. So today is Sunday, August 14th, and the program is number 14 in our series. We have done 13 other programs in the last 12 months. In fact, the very first session was done on August 15th of last year on Independence Day. So we are completing 1 year as of tomorrow, and we have done 14 sessions in 12 months so far. So simple guidelines for this session. Please stay muted during the fireside chat session. We don't want any external disturbance. Please turn off your video. All the participants can turn off their video. You will be asked to show your video or open your video. turn on video when you're ready to ask a question. The entire session is recorded, and if you have questions, you'll use a Slido, which I'll talk about in a minute. There will be periodic live polls in Slido, so please participate in the poll. And during Q&A, when you put your question in Slido, if your name is called, please unmute yourself to ask the question. So today's guest speaker is Ms. Shobana Radhakrishnan. You can see Shobana's information in the program notice I sent you all. Her LinkedIn profile link is also given here. So I'll be the host and Partha is my tech support. Today's program, as I said, for asking questions and participating in the real-time poll, you can use Slido. The way you join Slido is on any device, either it's your mobile, laptop, desktop, iPad, iPhone, or any tablets. You can open a browser and type slido.com. When you type slido.com, you get a screen, and in that screen, there will be a question which says that enter the code. And in that code, you can put this code 3983607. Once you type the code, then you'll get a screen like this, where you'll have two tabs, a Q&A tab and a polls tab. The polls tab is where if you click, you'll see the questions that I've asked in the poll. So right now I have one question that I've asked about where you're joining from. You should see that question in the polls. The Q&A tab is for you to type a question anytime during the session, and those will show up on the screen for all of us. And when the audience Q&A session starts, I will go through the questions and I will ask the person who put the question to ask the question themselves after unmuting and turning the video on. Okay, all good? Excellent. So I'm going to stop broadcasting now and then start the program. Okay, you ready, Shobana?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, so as I said, the first part of the program, again, welcome to the program. The first part of the program is we would like you to spend the first 15-20 minutes talking about your journey from CEG, and you could use any format, and if you'd like to take a break in between to get feedback, that's also fine, or if you want to finish your chain of thought, that's also fine. So it's basically the first 20 minutes is yours. You can go now. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks everyone. At least some of you, if you're in Chennai, you're joining on a Sunday night when you would probably rather be eating dinner or sleeping, going to bed maybe. So thanks for joining. And I'd be curious to see once we get the information where everyone is from, just to have the idea. So feel free to post on chat and share, Vish, as I speak when you respond. I don't know if I want to spend 20 whole minutes just about me. I would love for this to be also interactive, so we can get questions answered for everyone too. Let me maybe share a bit of my journey after CEG, and I'll touch upon maybe 4 points in my life that I consider pivot points, because Vish talked about, irrespective of if it's career or personal or other things, and I feel there are probably 4 points in my life I would consider pivot points, which are a combination of all of these. Each point is a combination. So I'll talk about that. So just to rewind several years, I graduated with a bachelor's degree in electrical and electronics engineering in '96 from Guindy. During that time, let me start with my journey of how my experience was on campus itself. I still love going back to the campus, by the way. Most of the time when I'm in Chennai, I try to at least drive through the campus because some of my best memories in life are on campus. And so I just love being there because I think the amount of nature we see around us, not just the buildings, I'm talking about the trees, just the expanse, how huge the campus is, I think gives a certain aura that I still think is really great and unique to Guindy. When I studied, we had, I think some of these professors are retired. We had SRP, like Paranjoti. I don't know if Vish, you might know him. We had some really great professors who absolutely loved power systems and circuit theory, and they were really passionate about what they were teaching us. So that made a big difference in terms of the learning. Even though my degree was, electrical and electronics, towards the final year, when we were thinking about what project to do, our advisor actually suggested implementing genetic algorithms, which was my first foray into AI. And at that time, back in the 90s, AI was taking off as this new field that's going to solve world problems, right? This was the time when Google hadn't been started. Yahoo maybe was 1 year old. Like there was no search engine, nothing like that. And I didn't know anything about genetic algorithms. I hadn't even heard the term. But my advisor pushed me to read some papers. He just pointed me to some papers that had been published around the world about genetic algorithms. And then using Unix SVR4 C for programming, my partner and I built a few algorithms for based on genetic algorithms for power systems optimization. And what happened was we developed 6 algorithms, and 2 of them did better than what TNEB had at that time. So that was very satisfying that you were able to solve a problem, see it working, and made a difference. And I believe that's true engineering, which is you try to solve a problem in a new way, or you try to solve a new problem, and that's very satisfying to you. And because of that experience, I decided to pursue computer science for my master's. So I moved here into the US to UIUC to pursue master's in computer science. It was, by the way, this is the first pivot point I want to talk about. I was this very, very traditionally raised girl who would get dropped off and picked up from college, and that kind of very protected environment. I'd worked for a year at Infosys in Bangalore, and then I moved back to Chennai. So pretty much very, very sheltered kind of upbringing. Now to pursue my master's, I had to move all the way across the world. And it was to a really cold place. Illinois, for any of you who's familiar, is extremely opposite from Chennai in terms of just the physical comfort. Didn't know anybody. This is basically was the first time I was even staying anywhere outside my home, because I never been in hostel. Even like relatives' home, it was very rare for us to stay on our own, the kids, right? And so it was a big shift outside my comfort zone. And I had to really adapt myself to a completely different way of working. Like universities here work differently from what we are used to in India. No family or relatives, etc. And also with minimal funding, right? I actually came without a full assistantship. So within a semester, I had to find assistantship. And so talking to the professors, figuring out how to find assistantship was all very new. But what really helped me, I feel, is I was never afraid. I never felt stupid to ask questions. I didn't worry about whether they were basic questions. I would just approach a professor, approach anyone in the office, and just ask whatever I felt I had to ask. So I feel like that lack of hesitation in both being outside the comfort zone and asking for whatever I needed. I didn't worry about what other people thought. I feel like that has helped me throughout my career. So that's one big change, way outside the comfort zone, completely new place, which probably many of us go through that journey if you're pursuing a master's outside India. And so I always reflect on it. Even now, like I never hesitate to ask questions in a meeting or in a room. I am never worried that I may be the only person who doesn't know it. It doesn't matter. So I wanted to call that out. That's helped me throughout. And then I moved here. After I graduated, I moved to California to work for a search engine called Excite. It's now Excite is now not in the scene, so many of you may not know it, but it was one of the top search engines before Google became popular. And what was interesting is Excite at home, because of this was great technology-wise. I even had a chance to implement an API which was used by partners like AT&T, like big partners, make presentations to them just 1 year into my career, which was nice. And then this company actually went bankrupt in the dot-com burst of 2000. So soon I was on an H-1 visa looking for a job, right? So that was another area where I didn't know, will I be staying back in the US, moving back to India? So there was a lot of risk-taking and ambiguity. And that's when I interviewed and moved to Yahoo, which was another very popular search engine. Great, almost 9 years there. Learning a lot of good high-scale architecture, high-scale technology. And I had really good mentors there who really made me develop my coding and technical and architectural practices. And during my tenure at Yahoo was my second major pivot. So this was a combination of personal challenges as well as career pivots. So during this time, I had married, I had started having kids, and during the time when I was actually in my last trimester, which is the last 3 months before the baby is born, with my daughter, a couple of things happened. On the work side, it was a very positive thing, which is I got promoted for the first time to a management role when I was almost 8 months pregnant, which is amazing, right? That a company is supportive and moves you into a role. So I was very excited about that growth. And this is for building very high scale like web hosting Geocities. So it's like millions of users kind of system, which is amazing. And on the personal side, something very negative happened, which is my father fell sick and went into the ICU for the first time. And he would spend the following year going in and out of the ICU and never making it back. So this happened in my third trimester as well, which means when we had this clear plan laid out where my parents would come and help out and all of that. But just hardly 3 weeks before the birth, before the due date, we came to know my father is in the ICU. And so my parents could not come and help out. And I'm also very stressed and worried about my father's health. And this was happening when I was getting promoted, right? So all this is happening within a month. So then I really had to reflect and think, what are the compromises I can make? How can I get through this, right? And how do I even see my father? What's happening there? So the first thing I had to do was extend my maternity leave because I knew I would be alone taking care of the baby. And so I had to work with my manager to extend it and still keep the promotion, right? Which at that time was not a given in those days. It's almost 20 years ago now. The good thing is I had a supportive manager and I was able to think through how I wanted to engage my manager and my team in getting through this as well. So that's one important thing I want to call out is when you go through personal struggles, make sure you can reflect on what works for you, what you want to do, how do you spend time on the personal things. But see, rather than just blindly compromising on, oh, I just have to give up my career, I just have to do this, which is very tempting to think, right? Or I just have to give up my personal if I pursue this. See what are the levers you can do. Can your manager do some things for you? Can your team do some things for you? Is there something in the process? And similarly, on the personal side, too, who else can help and how can you visit? So thinking through those options instead of thinking you have to choose one or the other. Very, very tough period, but because of the choices I made, I'm glad I did that. And I was able to do both. So my manager actually offered to do strategic planning on my behalf because this was all happening in Q4, which means most companies are doing annual planning, right? Which means I could not come back in and do it. He actually told me, I want the vision to come from you. Just give me the bullet points, even though you're on maternity leave, but I will do all of the bureaucratic process for you. So actually, when the baby was napping, I was writing strategy. That's how I did. But my manager did a meat of the legwork because I thought of asking him. He didn't offer it on his own, but because I asked him, he said, yes, I'll do it. Right. So I wanted to call that out. And because of that, I could actually spend time with my daughter, but also I was able to visit my father multiple times that year, which I'm very thankful for, and spend time with him and get through it equally or if not stronger than before that. So he actually passed away when my daughter was hardly 1 year old. But I'm still so glad that my daughter and I were both able to spend a lot of time with him in Chennai before that happened. But at the same time, I was able to find that supportive situation where I don't think I compromised on what my dream was on the career too. So that's my second pivot point, which I think shaped me as a person. That you probably all heard the saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And so this kind of thing will happen even in your corporate life. You may face politics, you may be starting a company, you have funding challenges, things to overcome. So when you keep thinking that, just think of all the options to help you get to where you want outside the box, you'll definitely get to where you desire, whether it's on the personal side or on the professional side. So that's the second pivot I wanted to mention. Now for the third one, so after Yahoo, I worked at a enterprise security company, Symantec. Many of you may know that. So all the way to working with device drivers and operating system layers, which was a lot of fun, great technology. Then I moved back to Yahoo. Actually, I had a second life in Yahoo, where I worked with Yahoo Cloud, private cloud, and then I moved to Netflix, which is, as you all know, the most popular streaming service currently in the world when you look globally. And When I moved to Netflix, I got this opportunity to lead the first originals launch, House of Cards, if you are familiar with it. It's the very first content original. It was a multi-year journey. And this is another case where my manager was able to take risk in me. And he said, do you want to just drive all of engineering across the company, across Netflix to lead this? I would not have thought about it. And when he asked me, I felt like, wow, am I even ready to take on such a big thing? Like Netflix is a few thousand people company, right? And how do you lead all of engineering across this big company to launch its first visible originals launch? Because House of Cards was something which the top stars in Hollywood were acting, and so things would change often. The requirements, everything had to change. So you had to adapt, constantly adapt and ship high quality, because this is one of those things which is going to have high press coverage, high launch visibility, all of that. But the part that helped me, so it was again very outside my comfort zone, and also trying to drive things with teams that I had not met, architectural pieces that I may not be familiar with, but they may be more familiar. And it's a big thing for the whole company. So it has visibility at the CEO level, which is good from a visibility perspective, but then you have to really operate like a spaceship, like very accurate, like high quality, etc. So a lot of learning there, but again, the being outside the comfort zone, being willing to be outside the comfort zone, and then figuring out what can go wrong, what should you think about, constantly learning and adapting. That's what helped with this too, and it was launched and became successfully and became very popular. But it was pretty like nerve wracking. The journey itself was nerve wracking. But I even thought of saying, oh, maybe I'm not ready. Can I co lead with one or two people? I first thought of reacting like that because I thought I was not ready. But then I felt like, why not take it on? And it turned out okay, even though I was nervous in the beginning. So that's another. The reason I call it a pivot is that was the largest scale, like thousands of people working on it, largest scale thing that I had personally driven, which was high stakes. And so being willing to take that risk and feeling confident, and also I got a lot of help and mentorship along the way. So that's one more pivot. That was the first time I had led company-wide efforts at a large enough company. Since then, I've had a chance to be at Roku, which is a top TV maker in the US. And at that point, I also started engaging very closely in diversity, meaning that we bring talent from everywhere, make sure women are represented. And in the US, also race matters. So all racial mix is well represented. It's something I started becoming more and more passionate about over time. So at Roku, I had the opportunity to drive company-wide efforts for that, to make sure there is a diversity at leadership levels at all levels as well. And so after between Netflix and Roku, I also had a chance to be part of a startup here. It was an online learning management platform, and that was again very different from everything else I had done. This was a small company of 30 people, but my role was to be part of the CEO's group and therefore interact with the board of directors pretty directly. For the first time, I'd been in a role where I was speaking with the board of a company for the first time. So I had to really, because I've been in a very technical role, even the first few times I did a presentation to the board, I had to really think about how to apply the non technical audience mindset to technical details, but still give them the right information on how is the company doing, how is the resourcing doing, where do we need to invest. So that again was again one more time outside the comfort zone, because I was used to technological presentations, technical leadership roles, but this was way outside that. How do you present to a non-technical board and get funding and persuade them and all of that? So again, great learning. And then all this led me to this final hop at Google, which I will call my, so the fourth pivot that I wanted to talk about. So when Google reached out to me about this product, Google TV, Vish has shared my profile in the program, but basically Google TV is a product that brings personalized recommendations to TV. So when you turn on a TV, instead of having a bunch of different OTT services or apps, we try to apply Google search algorithms and bring actual content that you might be interested in from all these millions of pieces of content across tens of thousands of apps, so that the users don't have to waste a lot of time searching for content. That's the whole premise of Google TV. So the pivot is now I'd worked in a few thousand people company. The largest was Yahoo, which was I think 15,000 when I was there. Then startup, which was 30 people, both extremes. But Google is a whole another level, almost 170,000 people. And this product was about bringing a lot of Google integration. So it ended up involving more than 500, 700 Google employees across every major group in Google. So as an engineering person, engineering leader, Google engineering leaders drive a lot of product strategy as well. So it really had to pull me into how do you form relationships, how do you form alignment without because Google is an ocean of different products, right? It's not like it's one company, one product. So how do you form the right relationships, persuade people to align with you on your product vision, and execute for multiple years? And so that again was a big learning because Google works a little bit more like a grassroots kind of company, even though it's a big company. So it's not like some top down decision is done. You have to talk to your peers, persuade them, get them excited, make joint presentations to leadership. It's almost like operating a startup within a large company, right? And so that again was for me another second pivot because it's about how important relationships are in getting people to work with you on something that is experimental, new, and it's a major shift. It's not just technical, it's not even just the business dollars. By just showing here is the profit we could make, you can't make people embark on a multi-year journey with you. It's also about the relationships, the credibility. How do you merge the cultures of the two teams, the processes of the two teams, and bring them together? So that was the other pivot in terms of just shaping my professional thought process of how much relationships matter to succeeding in your project, in your career, or when you start a new company. So I just wanted to share these four different pivots, and I know that they're all very different kinds of pivots. They contributed very different things. But when I reflect on these, I feel like my career can be kind of considered a planning by coincidence. So each of these hops is I thought about just what do I want to do next, but I also wanted to in general be in technology, leadership, and entrepreneurship. So that's been my background framework. But each individual hop was just decisions I made at that time based on what was going on in the career, but also personal side. So just wanted to share that story and the four very different pivots and their influences on me. But with that, I'll turn it back to Vish or to the audience for questions or even thoughts and ideas for me.
I think thanks, Shobana. What I can say is that you listen to 14 other speakers in the last 12 months, and each one has obviously a story to tell, and everyone narrates the significant turning points or or points of inflection in their career. It's amazing to see that almost there's one common thing I notice in all the stories is that you tend to make the biggest jumps or biggest learnings in life not when things are going well, but when things are not going well. This is a constant theme I've seen in all the speakers in they narrate the story. That's number one. Second thing, I think I wanted you to mention that your spouse, your husband, is also a CEGN, right? Did you meet him while you're in CEG, or is it something that happened after CEG?
I wish it were as romantic as that, but it's not. So he is EC 92. Funnily enough, we both had worked at Infosys but didn't overlap also. So he graduated 3 months before I started, right? And then we both went to Infosys different years, didn't meet there. Then we came for studies. I went to a different university. He got his PhD in Virginia Tech, didn't meet then. Then both of us moved to California. Like I moved in 99 after masters, he moved in 2000 after PhD. And then we met at a friend's event, like a birthday party or something, because we lived 20 miles from each other before we met. And even then, we had just met and we were acquaintances. But then what happened is through the traditional arranged marriage system, my parents actually found, oh, there is this boy in this area. And then I'm like, yeah, I met him at a friend's place. And then we meet more within the arranged marriage system, but it was already informal. And then we
Wow.
and our parents both aligned around the same time. So I almost call it a hybrid marriage.
Is he also in technology?
He is in technology. So he used to work at Qualcomm. He is more in the physical layer, the wireless space, and then now he's working for a startup called Verana, which is based out of Boston.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yes,
Okay.
I think he has remained true to the electronics and signal processing, and he has remained true to that. I have moved into computer science and software, I think.
Interesting. Great. So, a couple of things I want to kickstart the discussion that we can have. One is, uh, what would be your advice for students today, students, even young alumni for that matter, in terms of what areas of, if they are interested in technology for that matter, what areas of technology they should be focusing on? Because as you know, technology changes very often, and what is hot 3 years ago is not hot anymore. Since you are in one of the topmost technology companies in the world, where most technology gets started, actually, would you be able to share, trends in technology, or what things are going to become more important, less important, etc.?
Definitely. I think I'll maybe make it a two-part answer. One is just three areas of technology that I think is going to be influential. Then a couple of verticals, and I'll say in a minute what I mean by verticals or domain areas. So, from a technology perspective, although AI as a term has been around for a while, I think more and more AI based personalization systems are going to define all products. So it's going to become the core bread and butter. Like, even if it's a shopping thing, if it's a healthcare thing, if it's a music thing or search engine, everything is going to become how much do I know the user, how much can I tailor to this user so they're not wasting time. So I think that just doubling down on AI algorithms and just thinking about machine learning modeling. That's one technology that's going to remain core and expand influence. Second, I think is just a device ecosystem. So all of us know this, right? All our homes are now device ecosystems. We expect to our devices to play well together, like from mobile to TV, and in different countries the rate of adoption is different. Even in the US or other countries it's not fully adopted, but everyone expects apps to work on all devices, for example. So whenever you're building something, it has to be multi-device. And Are you able to hear me okay? I've got some noise.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So all devices working well together, no matter what you're building, people should be able to use all devices, whether it's on laptop or your mobile or even TV screen. Like fitness apps, for example, many people, we are noticing a lot of data globally where people want to do weights or fitness training from their home living room. They have the treadmill or whatever it is, and then they try to do a fitness video on TV on the big screen and do it. Or meditation videos, people want to trigger using mobile phone, which is convenient, but they want the big screen and do it like a group fitness class. And these things are emerging in some countries. They're reasonably established in some countries, but fast forward 3 to 5 years from now, it'll be more and more adopted. So thinking about multi-device whenever you build something, that's second. And the third, I would say, specifically like AR, VR is a big area. Definitely like Meta slash Facebook, Google, others are starting to develop it. But a lot of even like as we do online school, online gaming, online teaching and training, it's more and more likely to become mainstream. Traditionally, AR VR is this costly device which only training for astronauts, training for certain things like NASA, or in India also there is space stations. That's where it was applied. But AR VR is getting a lot of attention and energy. And once the main thing that's holding it up is two things, right? One is the network bandwidth, Bluetooth, that connectivity, and the second is cost. They're very very expensive today. But slowly that will become more and more mainstream. Give it 5 to 10 years. Each different countries will adopt at different points, but they are going to become more and more cost efficient and more commonly used gadgets. So those are the three technologies to watch out for. In terms of domain areas, I think media, healthcare, fintech, they all sound like they're traditional things, but there's a lot of investment, whether it's VC or large companies, ventures. Like Google has Google Ventures, all large companies have investment firms. A lot of investment is going into these three areas across the globe, even in Asia Pacific. So those are the domain areas to watch out for.
Super. The next question I had again is regarding opportunities. If one of the purposes of this program, when I introduce the speakers and also get students and alumni to join, is for them to get an idea what opportunities exist with the companies the speakers come from, in terms of internship or research or entrepreneurship opportunities. And I know I heard this from many people in Google, that Google works with a lot of individual entrepreneurs or entrepreneurship companies to to initially mentor them, sometimes fund them, and eventually acquire them. I know there is a application written by a CG guy in India, which software and app rather mobile app, which was used to track the railways in India.
Mm.
It's an app called Where Is My Train? I don't know if you heard that. It's a CG guy who developed the app Where Is My Train? And I remember the first conversation I had with him when he was writing the app. He said that I don't know if people are going to use it. I want to build it because a lot of people are looking for it, so I want to build it. And I remember him telling that I don't know if I should do it. And we had a conversation. I said, I think this sounds like a good app, and he developed it. And then, was lo and behold, Google acquired him sometime, and he's doing very well now. So that's one example of where Google had worked with an individual entrepreneur. Do you see opportunities for our students and our alumni to work with Google, not maybe as employment, but getting help from Google for mentoring or funding or things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you mentioned internships too, which I can address briefly. But let's first talk about the entrepreneurship and individual entrepreneurs. So there is a whole wing under Alphabet. So as some of you know, Alphabet is the main holding company. Google is a company under Alphabet. So Google Ventures is a startup investment arm within Alphabet, which is like being part of Google. And they do invest, like Waymo, for example, was an investment from Google Ventures. There are many ventures that they fund, hundreds, and a lot of times they do reacquire unless there is a different form of exit for the startup. They do acquire and reacquire. In fact, I am personally signed up to be a mentor for startups funded by Google Ventures. So a lot of Google employees and Google leaders actually are mentors for these startups. So it's an immense opportunity to get funding. So similar to the story of Where Is My Train, it usually starts with a gap that you feel many people feel. You build something and then it starts getting used. Those are great candidates. So if anyone wants to get more concrete information, or you applied and you just want contacts or how to navigate, feel free to use me as a contact with you. I am signed up as a mentor in Google Ventures.
So is it okay if we mention in some of our CEG forums that if anyone wants to consider an opportunity for working at Google, that they can contact you? Is it okay?
Yeah, I think it's totally okay to say that, especially on the venture side, because I am signed up as a mentor. And if you're looking for internships or roles, I can usually at Google. What happens is just applying online is going to get the same thing as me putting in a referral. That's the way Google works. But if you want to help navigating the system, where do I find data analytics internships or something? I'm always happy to answer
Okay.
questions.
And when you say you're a mentor for this group, do you mentor only companies that Google is investing in, or do you also mentor for companies that Google may not be investing in?
So the way this mentorship works is I signed up specifically with Google Ventures. So usually it'll be like Google Ventures is funding and there is a match for what they are looking for and where I'm offering mentorship. So it's an internal formal system. But as you know, Vish, I've also connected with the incubator arm of Anna University. So if there are any startups that can benefit from a mentorship through that, I'm happy to work. That's outside of Google.
See, we have several social media groups that we have created in the last few years, and one of the groups, two of the groups, are very focused only on innovation and entrepreneurship. There are a lot of CEG entrepreneurs and people who want to become entrepreneurs who are part of the group, and many of them would look for advice, guidance, and mentoring. So that's one area where we have a bunch of CEGNs, mostly young people who are trying to start businesses who might benefit from that.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if I have added you to some of these groups, but I'll try to add you to the group, and maybe there you can. There will be opportunities for people to reach out to you to take help from you, and you may be able to find some opportunities that may be of interest to Google too, to look at, because we have quite a lot of entrepreneurs in CD who are doing a lot of cool things
Yeah.
uh, all
Yeah,
over the world.
definitely. And the other thing I want to mention in that light is in Google, we Google does a lot of businesses in a lot of spaces. So if there are good opportunities for M&A, which is mergers and acquisition side, if a startup has already proven itself as a running revenue and is a good target, Google is always open to looking at those, even in the
Okay.
media space where I work. So we have, in fact, I've had several opportunities where we've done assessments of startups out of Bangalore. potentially considering either acqui-hire or acquisition. So yeah, definitely open to hearing more about startups.
Okay. Super. So now let's go on to the audience questions, Shobana. There are a bunch of questions that are queued up here. So let me start off with the question. Um, Somebody asked a question: Is in the recent past, due to hybrid remote working, is there a hindrance to growth in the career or efforts and potential seen? Whoever asked the question, can you please ask the question yourself and explain the context of your question, please?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. Hey, Vish, this is Avin here
Yeah.
from the Netherlands. The question I asked is because in the last 2 to 3 years, we've been seeing a rapid pace of hybrid working, but also remote working. I see that Shobha is indeed a senior director in a big firm, and I wonder how does she see if you were to see a potential team member, an engineer, or an architect, or a developer, how would you see it through remote? There are quite some differences face to face versus remote. I wonder what is your perception about it?
It's a very timely question, something that even large companies haven't fully answered the perfect answer. But, one thing personally, my experience, I have had remote employees even well before COVID, even my own direct reports or engineers on the team. I think it's a couple of things. One is everything is possible to make it work remotely, but the onus is on the person to be productive and to communicate well. Right? That's the thing that happens with remote for all of us. When you're working remotely with any team, the bar just is higher in terms of making sure you can be independently productive and are able to communicate well enough that people know what you're working on, where you need help, etc. So anyone who is able to balance that is usually able to succeed remote. At Google, for example, we have said 3-2, which is 3 days at work is the guidance, but we are typically very what we call quote unquote flex for the actual execution. Like I have team members in Bangalore. Some team members have moved to their hometowns to be closer to their parents, and they've decided to work remotely from there with their Bangalore teams. And my teams have Mountain View Bangalore, and we have a Zurich team. So we've already had to work with a remote productivity before COVID. So it is workable in terms of productivity and the person having a good performance rating and having a good experience in getting work done. I will say that there is an element of relationship that is just easier if you're able to meet face to face. So even teams that are remote, when travel opens up and travel is comfortable, being able to come and travel and meet maybe once a quarter, once in 6 months, whatever is the right frequency from a budget perspective. Like for example, my India team leads come and stay for a couple of weeks, at least once in 6 months. Not just the lead. Sometimes we encourage everyone to come and join. So there is an element of the face to face relationship and trust that gets established when you know the person, when you get to know the person. When it's mostly remote calls, people tend to just focus on the agenda and not really get to know each other as person because they're being respectful of time, right? So that face to face element, whether it's because you're traveling reasonably frequently or you make an in-person when you're first joining the company, spend a few weeks in person and then become remote, that is important, I do feel, to keep that relationship, just having that connection and alignment. And then there's always the types of activities, like when you're doing an architectural overview or you're doing vision and strategy planning, sometimes you may find it much easier to whiteboard, much easier to do in-person stuff versus just using a two-dimensional screen and slides and all of that to make discussions be effective. So applying the right judgment on those things, what you cover in the face-to-face time versus remote. So those are the few things that I have noticed to be needed. But in terms of career growth, like upward growth, I don't think remote or in-person, full in-person is going to be a hindrance. Definitely not the case for Google.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
Shobana.
you.
The next question I see here is somebody asking, can you talk about the opportunities and challenges of being woman in a technical field and a technology company? Whoever asked the question, can you please unmute and ask the question and the context? Okay, so you can answer the question, Shobana. You saw the question, right? Can you talk about the opportunities and challenges of being woman in a technical field and technology company?
Sure. Definitely, I think Google, my experience is an extremely inclusive place. It's probably the most inclusive place I have worked in, where there are pretty direct incentives to make sure everyone in the team is included. I'll give a concrete example. For any leader, even if they are male, white male, Indian male, doesn't matter. For any leader to get promoted beyond a certain mid level, they need to have demonstrated that they have shown community impact and contributed to diversity and inclusion with an actual result, not just talking, but actually what did they do to make the team feel included? How did they change the diversity and inclusion elements? For example, personally, and many people who are mid-level and above, we actually take formal goals, and these goals are publicly published within the company. So anyone in the company can see what goals I took in the beginning of the year and hold me accountable. And I'm supposed to rate it, right? So these kinds of things create a very direct incentive. Even to get promoted, to get a good rating, you need to demonstrate whether you're white, male, or not. So that kind of company is something you should look for when you start a job, when you progress in your career. Just look at what is the company's culture. And these are very explicit signals for that. That's one comment I would say about Google and just what to look for in companies. But honestly, when I reflect on my journey, whether it's my time at Gindi or otherwise, I'll confess one thing that I did not actually know the percentage of women in engineering when I decided to go into engineering, right? Like the first time I heard the numbers was after I moved to the US, because in the companies here, they talk about it a lot. But in Gindi or when I was applying in my 12th standard, I didn't actually even think about, oh, is this the thing that mostly girls do? I know this sounds cliche, but that was not on my mind. And in a way, I'm glad that I didn't think about it. Maybe I wouldn't have chosen engineering if I saw some numbers that show that girls are very few. But my father and I used to do this thing where my dad actually enjoyed fixing things at home, right? Whether some scooter broke or car, some problem was that he'll just fix it at home. And often I would be doing it with him. Like he'd get me to help in something, even if the TV had a problem. So I felt like this stuff is easy. Like you just go and figure out problems and fix them. And so I thought I'll enjoy engineering in general. So I just went with that into engineering. I've had experiment batches, project groups where it was mostly boys in Gindi as well as after that. Even now in meetings, sometimes I'm the only woman in the room. But I feel like if I connect with the people based on something else we are passionate about, right? Then you stop noticing whether it's women or girls or boys in the room. It's more of this person and I think similarly about architecture, or we both think about healthcare as a problem that we should solve. Or just once you try to connect with people on something else other than just the gender, you actually stop noticing it. I know this sounds naive, but this has been the experience for me. So a lot of times I've partnered with men, both in Gindi and well beyond that. But you always connect because you're passionate about something, maybe the company culture, maybe the architecture, maybe the design. And trying to focus on that doesn't helps you feel like you're not the only woman in the room. Now, having said that, I do feel culturally like women are expected to play certain roles, right? At home and raising the children. We have a very traditional culture in India, and it is true across countries. So being able to work with your husband or wife, your spouse, to just make sure that the balance is working for both of you, so that one person is not taking most of the home load, right? And that culturally is still true everywhere. Just kind of being open to that and making sure that you have a balance, so you're not living two full-time lives while trying to pursue the career, right? I feel that is also something that is true challenge for women in today's society across countries. So being proactive about how do you balance it so you're not burnt out trying to solve everything on both sides. That has been a very important part also, to not feel like women are at a disadvantage. So that those are the two things I would say.
Super. The next question I see in the list here, Shobana, is that somebody asking, great to hear you worked in many top tech companies. How did you find these opportunities? Did you go through recruiters? Whoever asked the question, can you please unmute and ask the question and the context? I think they don't want to. So, can you answer the question, Shobana?
Sure. Yeah. I think, like I mentioned earlier, I reflect on my career as planning by coincidence. So I have had recruiters in my network, but I've not used recruiters primarily. In the earlier stages of my career, I would just look for what companies looking for these kinds of things, or people would reach out. That's also happened to me. For example, the startup I worked in reached out to me when I was at Netflix because they needed someone who had done what I had done at Netflix, which is scaling the organization and the systems. And so they reached out. That's an example where people may target you because of your experience, because they're searching on LinkedIn and finding you. And then it's up to you to decide, do I want to spend time interviewing with this company or do I just not respond? But it's been a combination of just being organically networked with different people who just happen to know your work because maybe you met them at a conference, you met them at some event, or you interacted with them. That is an important part of how, especially the later hops, were mostly people who knew my work. So as an example, when I was, why did I get into Yahoo? Because I was actually actively searching, right? Because Excite went bankrupt. I was on an H1, I had to find a job, so I was applying. And then Yahoo was one of 3 or 4 companies that I finally decided to interview. And that's how those happened. But if you take the example of Roku, I did apply from Netflix and the startup to Roku. But the reason Roku also went with hiring me is because I had Netflix experience, which is in the media and TV space. So the overlapping experience started helping me later in my career. And in the case of Google, Google actually reached out to me. And this is, I'll share a quick interesting story. So I was very happy at Roku. Roku was doing well as a company. But the person that I report to is someone I met in 2013 because she and I were on a women in tech panel together. She was in YouTube, I was at Netflix at the time. So we just connected over lunch and that was it. And we had kind of occasionally helped stay in touch. And when she was taking the role on within Google, she was moving into this Google TV business role. She had actually met me for coffee when I was at Roku saying, should I take this role on? What is the global market and user base and all of that opportunity? And I said, yes, you should take it because the media space is far and wide. It's going to get to tens of millions of users, if not more. And she had talked to me over coffee to decide on her role itself. But then she later flagged to the Google recruiting team to reach out to me to hire for within her organization. So you see, that's an example of just organic networking that just led to, oh, this person may be a match because they worked at Netflix, they worked at Roku, and she's had a few interactions with me. So that's an example. Maybe later in my career, that has also been a mechanism of how I have gotten into roles as well.
Right. So other question is somewhat related to this earlier question about working in several companies. Whoever asked the question, can you please unmute and ask the question?
Yeah, I had actually asked the same question as well, Vish. So I saw I saw Shobana's profile, and it was so inspiring that she did move across quite a few companies, and I wonder if this helped her a lot every 2-3 years to hop onto new jobs. Was there a reason as to you did this, or you didn't see a potential growth in the current company because all the companies you worked are quite big? So I wonder what made you decide to move around. Was it getting out of your comfort zone, or was it like, this is the same job I keep doing over and over? I'm not sure what was your thought process, Shobana?
I'm glad you asked that. And if you notice, within some companies, I was growing. Like within Yahoo, there was growth. Within Symantec, there was growth, and Google, and so on. The things that prompted me are a couple of things. One, as I mentioned, there were also a couple of cases where the company reached out. I wasn't actively interviewing, and most of the times you ignore these, but sometimes you feel like, oh, this is piquing my interest, and so maybe I'll talk to them. So a couple of reasons that I have moved. One is if I'm getting bored in the same place, especially if I've been there for a long time, then I feel like, am I doing the same thing over and over again? And I don't feel, unless I'm in my comfort zone, this is maybe my personality, I start getting bored. And so, I either look for within the same company, are there things that I could be doing where I'm also learning and outside the comfort zone versus not learning anymore. Or it may be a new space, and because someone reached out, I feel like, oh, that space I've never done. Like, for example, when the startup reached out to me, I felt that I had never worked in a role where, even though it was a small company, I was in the CEO's team, directly responsible for the business, which means you're working directly with partners, directly with the board. So I felt like that would give me a learning that I have not done before. So even though it was a smaller company, I actually took a pay cut to go to the startup. I still made the jump, and it was immensely satisfying. And after that, at Google again, you have to wear that entrepreneurial hat to execute, to drive things. And I do think that learning of how do you talk to people who are not in the same frame of reference as you makes made a big difference for me when I moved to Google. So I have switched. If I feel stagnated, I'm not learning, I'm not outside my comfort zone. Or B, when a group reached out and I feel like, oh yeah, that's going to give me something that I have not done before. I'm going to learn. So those are the two times that I have switched. And there have been a couple of switches where I felt like maybe within the company I didn't see the career growth path, and I made a switch. So there have been one or two like that as well. So it's a combination of all these factors.
And I think the question Arvind is asking, was it seen positively or negatively? That's an interesting question. Do people, when you look at a new company, look at your background and say that it is positive you have been in other companies, or they see that you have been switching to a
I'll say this: when anyone switches, I have always seen that there is a moving away from element and a moving towards element. There is if and often actually many of my mentees ask this question, which is if it's only moving away from that's prompting you, then you might make a mistake in where you go next. So for all my switches and in general, what I recommend is there's always a moving away from, whether it's boredom or you don't see career growth, or maybe that team is not quite the chemistry you want, whatever the reason could be, there is a moving away from. Otherwise, no one's going to spend the time, doing all the interviews. It takes effort and time, but making sure that there is a moving towards. For me, it's three factors. Am I going to be making an impact? Who are the people I work with? Is it going to be like high energy feeling working with them? And three, am I going to be learning something that I won't be learning if I stayed in my current role? For me, those are the three factors. So each person has to be clear about what you want to move towards. What are the factors that you want amplified in the new role? But for me, it's always been a mix of, there's been both, moving away from something, moving towards something.
Hmm.
But it's not, I would say, always been negative. As in, if I'm just, bored and in this company, if it's a small company that's only the same thing, I don't consider it negative versus maybe I just feel stagnated and I need to move.
Thanks a lot to share, Shobana. The reason as to why I ask is not to demean your experience, please don't misunderstand, but rather to ask a question on how do people perceive this? Because I perceive it as moving out of the comfort zone and learning something better, newer, taking high responsibilities. But some may see it as a different way, and that's the reason why I asked the question.
Yeah, it's a good question. In fact, the Bay Area average tenure is about 2 years. So I think my my
Okay.
profile is a very common one, but it's
Okay.
interesting angle to
Yeah,
I,
I work in Europe. I work in the Netherlands, and here the average time years of switching is about 5 years on average.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
really takes 5 to 10 years. People really look up, hey, if you leave a big company, why do you leave? Is
yeah,
then something else better? Yeah, that's why.
yeah. I can totally see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can tell you from my personal experience, my daughter is 25 years old and she's only been 4 years. She graduated, she has changed 3 jobs already.
Wow. Yeah.
She started in Google last week, by the way.
Yes, I know. I've connected with her. So to Arvind's question, people do look for that. Is this person going to job hop, and are they an attrition risk, and what was going on if they switch frequently? In fact, it's an important one to think about, but it's the context. Like different regions have very different behaviors, normal behaviors, and so applying that context in evaluating it is interesting.
No, I think it's an interesting question because I know that I have worked and run companies in the US as well as in India, and I worked with my HR teams. My HR team, the company I ran in India, they used to think of this being negative actually.
Yeah,
Uh, they say that for, I don't know, it's a mindset or cultural thing, but people who recruit in India, particularly people who are in HR and recruiting, think that stability is more important than change. So when resumes used to come, and when I used to ask them to give me recommendations of which ones to look, they normally would say that this resume, this person has changed jobs too often, and sort of portray it in a negative way. In the US, of course, they don't care because people look at you what you want, and they don't really look at how many times you change jobs, etc. So that's an interesting question because it does depend upon the geography and the culture in how it is looked at, actually.
Indeed.
Yeah, yeah.
Indeed. In Europe, we see that when we do some recruitment, we definitely, it's a negative point, especially when we see engineers or architects hop on every 2, 3 years. It seems to see that it feels like the person is trying to get a financial incentive rather than a career incentive. So
Yes.
I think it's a perspective that's really nice to know how it works there as well.
Yeah, it's a common thing that people do filter. My brother graduated, just a couple of years earlier than me. He lives in India, and he had been with the same company for almost 20 years. It's two kids from the same family.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for the insights, Shobana. Yeah.
So next question is from someone asking about Google Ventures. Who is asking the question? Can you please unmute, ask your question and the context, please? Okay, let me ask the question from right. It says, do Google Ventures invest only in IT startups or non-IT startups also included?
That I would have to double check to make sure I'm giving the most accurate response. But they do invest in for like Waymo, like combination of devices, robotics. It's typically technology, I think, but I'll have to double check so I'm giving the most accurate answer. But it's
Is
not
there,
it's not IT or software only. It can be any other tech too.
is there a Google Ventures arm in India as well?
Yeah, I don't think it is region specific. Google Ventures is global.
No, but is there a person in Google Ventures who looking at based in India, looking at things in India? Do you know?
I don't think so. But there are probably representatives, but I don't think there's like a whole leader that is specific to the country. But I'd have to double check. I don't know for sure.
Okay. Okay. The reason I'm asking is that I run a lot of entrepreneurship events in India, both for colleges as well as for public, and often I look for people who are experienced in that space to invite them as speakers. So if you know of someone in Google Ventures in India who's there, then I can consider them as inviting for some event. That's why I asked the question.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll let you know.
Okay, so the next question is coming from Kaushalya. Kaushalya, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. Good evening, ma'am, and thank you so much for organizing this session. They were a lot of inspiring moments. The way ma'am said that without being hesitant to ask questions has fueled her growth. That inspired me to ask the question. And as a fresher, how did you, what was the mental framework which you adopted while designing and developing massive applications which are at huge scale? Like you worked with Yahoo and then Google and then now and Netflix as well. So what was the mental framework which you adopted? Because from school and college, I'm a fresher now. We know what exactly we have to do in certain cases. Like we have a syllabus to study and we apply it and we explore. But in these cases, there's a lot of responsibility on us, right? We need to ensure consistency and so many other factors. How did you cope up with it, and what resources have you been using? Yeah.
Actually, it's excellent that you're asking this question because that is the biggest thing that you don't learn in college is how do you build real systems at high scale, which is fundamentally different from writing code that works, right? And so at Yahoo, so it's a combination of factors. One is so I tend to read books as a hobby habit. So I actually bought books about system architectures and high scale architectures and try to absorb that. That's my style. I still read books, just slightly other topics now. And so that's been an important source for me is for example how did other companies design high scale architectures, what are the do's and don'ts. There are some good books on that based on real companies and both failures and successes, so those books have been useful. Second is when I joined Yahoo, I actually talked to some of the senior engineers who had built Yahoo Mail, who had built systems that were serving several millions if not even billion users. And a lot of times you'll find in most companies, people are willing to sit down with you and walk through their architecture. So when I said, hey, can you walk me through the architecture? They're very happy and proud to share that. So that was another thing I did, at least at Yahoo, and I've done that since then, is just talk to the leads, like technical leads or anyone who has built systems and just ask them to walk you through. their architecture, what are some trade-offs they did, because that's a practical mindset. And the third thing is, when I started implementing code for high scale, first time was Yahoo was the highest, very high scale. I made sure that people were reviewing my code and my design all the time. So that again is not something you learn in college, but the more people can poke holes at what you're designing before you implement, the more, the stronger your implementation is going to be. So that's the third thing. Is even now, if I'm coming up with a proposal, just make sure people will poke holes at it before you present. That's always helpful. Now I do it even when I'm thinking about organizational structure or cultural changes. Someone trusted advisor, just get them to review and give you candid feedback on what can break. And then the very final thing I'll say is what my first mentor told me is, whenever you build high scale systems, you should make sure that you have enough logging, instrumentation, all of that, so that anytime something goes wrong, you can diagnose it in minutes. Because if a whole site goes down, you don't want people waiting for hours. So that's another tip to keep in mind as you implement is, am I building a system that is easy to diagnose in minutes, no matter how complex it is? So those are the things I would say.
It's
Thank you,
interesting.
Crystal.
These are things, these are things that they teach in school, don't you think?
Could you please recommend the books for designing large-scale systems?
Sure, I can send a couple of links to Vish. Maybe he can share.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, do that.
Actually, Vish, it was me who asked that question. I had some trouble unmuting. Hello,
Ah,
Shobana. This is Raghu, and I'm from 94 ECE, and I was in IT industry for 20 years, and last 6 years in surrounding health and wellness. And it was me who asked the question. Does Google Ventures? It was a general question I asked. Support any non-IT, especially in any health and wellness type startups? So that was my question. Yeah.
Got it. I know that in terms of domain, yes, healthcare and wellness are areas that they do invest. So I wasn't sure what you meant by non-IT, but it could still be like technology or software, but for these domains, I think that they definitely do invest.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Good to meet someone who probably overlapped with me. If you're 94, we were walking
Absolutely,
on the campus at the same time, so that's nice.
absolutely. I was more of a hostler. Probably you might know some of our batchmates from the year '94, like Lakshmi Narayan,
Yes.
Santosh. I don't know whether you remember any of these names. Yeah.
Lakshmi Narayan, I know. Uh,
Okay.
you might do you know Sundar Gandhi from ECE? My husband is 92, so I don't know.
Okay. Definitely,
Or
we would have. I would have seen him. What branch? He's from electronics. Or which branch?
ECE. He's from ECE. He even ran for, I think, president, student president and all.
Okay. Because I think Ashok Aram was the most popular name from that batch, electronics. So definitely same department. Probably when I was second year, when your husband was in final year, so you would
Yeah,
have definitely seen him. Yeah, if I see his face, I'll be able to recognize. Yeah.
yeah, nice.
Thank you.
one last question, Shobana, from someone about architect learning. Whoever asked the question, can you please ask the question in the context?
Wish, this is Babu. Thanks for the presentation, Shobana. Actually, I was looking forward to it. And it's a surprise that I'm also from 92 batch. So don't underestimate when Wish says people are from starters, like students or something. This event. If he has mentioned there is a investment, then probably it would have been flooded with a lot many people, I suppose. Uh, it attracts, right? So that is the one thing. And being from a production engineering, I am working in IT. I feel like the people talk about, uh, you touched upon like how to debug when there is issues, right? These are all things put in as a process, right? It's like companies, startup companies, sometimes they don't get into that mode of instrumentation, right? They just want to deliver. Whereas companies like Google or Yahoo, they have the process in place. They just pass through the QA before even implementing a small change, right? But as an architect, like, is there any blog you write or something, or for people like what you're saying, I can refer some books, right? Pragmatic programming or something, whatever you mentioned. There is a difference between reading a book and listening to a webinar, a session, technical session, right? How you interpret the thoughts written is different. It's like directly going to the endpoint or hop and hop. It's up to the individual capacity to translate. So do you think, like, is there any you can talk small short videos and then share it with Bish or in the channel, so that the students can get a gist of it, right? We don't want to be giving a technical session for 1 hour. Like, I used to attend a lot of sessions, but sometimes it becomes boring and it doesn't get in, right? But at least the concepts over the period of time when they are studying, if they say like listen to one video in a week, it will be a lot. By the time they come out, they will have a lot of concepts behind their to validate, right? Is there any thought process on that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I feel like before we graduate itself, if we had a little bit more content, even if it is like guest speaking for 30 minutes, something about just architectural best practices, it makes a big difference. So you don't have to organically learn it by exposure, right? I think that's an excellent idea. If I find any good short videos that touch upon just the key things, I can definitely share the link with Wish too. The other thing, whether it is to your point, startups are focused on first implementing like the first product market fit, right? So they can't think about instrument, and they're probably working with 5 people or 10 people. So you can't think about extensive processes and instrumentation at that stage. Which is why it's when you scale that you can start really thinking about it after you have your first customers. But secondly, also even within big companies or even medium-sized companies, one common mechanism I've seen is having a senior, they're called technical leads or architects, different titles in different places, but they develop what I call architectural best practices. They could be like a 10-slide version, 15-slide version, or it could be like a 2-page, 3-page Word document or something, where they call out, like that's what we do in my group in Google, for example, or even smaller companies like Netflix, we've done that, is just making sure there's an explicit checklist of here are the do's and don'ts, here are the architectural best practices, and also even other processes. Babu, you're pretty experienced, so you may already know this. But people have like pretty structured post-mortem or retrospective processes where if something goes wrong in production, all the engineers come together and really analyze what went well, what didn't go well. And that I have noticed is a constant reinforcement. A lot of architectural practices are learned because of these engineering processes versus like even the planned text and presentation. So these seem to be complementary mechanisms that groups
Yeah,
develop over time.
I to give you a background, right? I am not that experienced, to be honest, right? So, but I work as a Oracle DBA, and Oracle publishes the best practices, right, for any tech matter subject, right? They have a best practice to follow for any architecture like that. Do you think like the students should go through that while they are studying? Because the moment you enter the work, right, you are focused only to your domain. It becomes very short, right? If you ask me, I would have read a lot of best practices for Oracle space, but not as a overall, right? So do you encourage, or do you think like that concept should set in with the students rather than just studying textbook scoring marks coming out? It's a must. Yeah, without your ranking you cannot get uh, masters, right? That is a different thing. But apart from that, how do you like what are all the basic architecture things you want them to read, especially when they are from IT?
Right. I think internships is. I know it's not a direct answer to the what do we study. I don't know the latest syllabus for like CS or software in an university and how much they include some of these things. And I think going for actual industry internships, which I know an university, at least when I was studying, we didn't. That was not a conscious practice every year, but I did once. That was TNEB, of course. That was electrical engineering. But getting into internship, no matter what your role is, even if your role is just testing, just doing some basic analysis, it just exposes you to the rest of the system anyway. So that's one mechanism while you're studying itself, getting that hands-on experience versus the textbook material. The second is, I think, some of these architectural concepts like microservices, how do you do architectural decoupling? Instead of having to read books on your own, there may be courses. I don't know if again NIST we offer, but universities here, for example, you can audit or you can go and take a number of courses which are related to practical architectures. Like you may learn AI, but how do real personalization systems work? What are the architectural pieces? If there are classes like that, it's good to take. And now there are also a lot of online videos you can find, even actually, frankly, even on YouTube, where professors are doing uh, teaching these practical architecture. So those are all things I would encourage people to do while you're studying itself. Those options are available. And especially, I think in software and IT, you're learning throughout too, right? Like 20 years ago, microservices was not even a concept. So even if I had looked when I was in university, I wouldn't have found it. But it's a basis for most architectures today. So just getting to know that and therefore going and like looking at some online videos or a book, whatever is the mechanism for you, we have to learn throughout because new architectural paradigms are also always evolving, especially in software. So I would say both of those types of things.
Yeah, I think, Shobana, I think one thing I'm thinking of doing as part of the CG Connect, and we already had some plans about that, is this session that we are doing now with you is most about experiences in general. How do you go from where you were in college to where you are now, focusing on various aspects of it. We also run another program as part of CG Connect called CG Field Insights. The CG Field Insights is again focused on trying to learn a particular vertical or a particular domain. I'm thinking there's a third program that we can start, which is focusing more on the technology part of it. So, what should an ITCS person need to learn or know while in college to be productive and useful for employment? Or what should a electrical engineer need to know to be productive and equal when you come out of the college? Maybe that's a program that I can think of putting together where it will directly answer the question that Babu is asking. That because people when they come out of college have no idea about what is required to be successful in the real world. I mean, internships help, but you know that internships are not very taken very seriously in India. I know it's taken seriously in the US, but not taken seriously. What I
Mhm.
do know, Vice Chancellor, when I spoke to him last, he said that the new education policy that they are trying to implement mandates that people have to have 1 year of internship and they have to get a certificate from the employer. Now, interestingly, in College of Engineering India, we have a MSc program, a 5 year integrated MSc program where people join after plus 2 and they get after 5 years a Master of Science, MSc degree. For that degree, 1 year of compulsory internship is 1 year of compulsory internship is required. So I find out when I recruit from CEG, people who come out of this 5 year MSc are far more ready and far more ready to join work and contribute than taking people from BE or BTech. So
Yeah.
I think maybe CEG can put a program like what Babu is asking. That could be a good idea to, I would call it that, getting students market ready or employment ready or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. My experience has been there has to be a hands-on element for real learning,
Yeah,
meaning that you can do part of an architecture, but you can see the architecture versus the lecture style.
right.
Because there's something about the passive absorption and active absorption in our brain that's just different.
Agree.
So I would recommend at least a small hands-on element if we want to
Yeah.
do programs like that.
Super. So thank you, Shobna. I think we have gone through all the questions here. And again,
Wish if
yeah.
there is no more questions, thanks Shobana for the what you call feedback. And is there any promotion from the side of Google Cloud or something you want to share with everyone? For all those attendees.
I just came to talk to young students so I can feel young, Babel. That's my only interest.
We are always young with the wish is the youngest.
So no, I don't plan to do any business promotion here.
Kidding. Thank you.
Okay, super. Thanks, Shobana, for joining. And it's a little bit longer than what we expected. It's a useful session. And I think a lot of people, we do record this program, as I said. So I noticed in the previous programs, a lot more people look at the recording when they're available. So they might get questions. Also, another feedback I have received from all my prior speakers is that they get a lot of requests for via LinkedIn or through Facebook or other mechanisms after they see the video. So don't be surprised if you get a lot of requests uh, from people. That happens for all the speakers, and most of them seem to like that. And the third thing is that if you know of anybody else from your batch, or and this is request for all of you in the call, not just Shobana. If you guys know of anyone who you think would be a good candidate to be a speaker in this series from your batch or adjacent batches of people you know from CEG, I'll definitely appreciate you giving me some references. I can reach out to them and get them as a speaker as well. And if you know of anyone in Google, Shobana, that from CEG who you think would be a good person to put on this session, then certainly I would appreciate any recommendation from you. I'm also looking for a lot of very good women speakers. As you know, that we have a lot more women and girls in CEG now than the last few years than what we had, say, a couple of decades back. So if you know of anyone from your batch or any batches, certainly those recommendations would be helpful as well.
Sounds great. I have a few names I can think of. I'll send you later.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. No further questions for the session, and any feedback that comes through, I'll send it to you, Shobana. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thank you. And enjoy the rest of your night. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.